what do you do with churches if applying your thinking? Do you have a soft spot for retaining some sort of benefit, incentivization for churches to do their good charity?
Honestly, I would say only in terms of charitable work. I think that the truth is, if you're running a church or any organization such that you're not retaining your money and you're not making a profit anyway, you're not going to pay any taxes. Now, of course, your donations won't be tax-free, but again, I'm not sure why we normally tax gifts to the giver. They pay tax on their income and then they give money out of the after-tax income. And I'm just not so convinced that giving money to your church should be, in essence, subsidized any more than anything else. Surely it means more to God if it's coming right out of your pocket and not with an assist from the taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Your Substack article of, I think, last year, Professor Reynolds, about the ruling class monoculture. What's the ruling class monoculture and who's in it?
Well, all of this kind of fits together, as you no doubt think, which is why you're asking about it. Our ruling class is increasingly, and I was kicked off in thinking about this by an essay by Angelo Codevilla from about 10 years ago or more. I think it was 2010. But, he makes the point, which I echo, that our ruling class is much more homogenous than it used to be. They, in the old days, you had elites from different parts of the country, and, the people in the West might have made their money in mining and ranching or land speculation, and the people in the East might have made it in steel or railroads and so on. And they had somewhat different backgrounds. They tended, you had a small upper crust elite that went to the Ivy League, but the majority of even elites tended to, if they went to college at all, to go to more local schools, and they studied different things and they learned different things and they had different peer groups. Now, everybody in our ruling class pretty much goes to the same handful of schools. And even if they go to one of the imitators that's not quite as high up on the food chain, that's almost worse because it's a place that is trying really hard to be like the ones higher up on the food chain. And so, so they come out thinking the same things, believing the same things, with a lot of sort of articles of faith that are taught them in college. They marry each other, which didn't used to be so true. But we have assortative mating now where, bosses don't marry their secretaries anymore. They marry somebody of their own social level or close to it. And then they send their kids to the same kind of schools they went to and so on. And I'd be fine with all this if it looked like it was getting us a really top-notch ruling class. I'm not anti-elitist in general necessarily, except that for me, if you're going to have elitism, you really need to have an elite. And an elite means that they should be better. And I don't think anybody's going to defend the proposition that the people who are running this country now are that great. The evidence is everywhere that they're not.
Are the major establishment philanthropies in America part of the ruling class?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And indeed, one of the things that helps maintain this monoculture are the large establishment philanthropies because, they, as I mentioned, they fund journalism that repeats the same ideas everywhere. They fund research and professorships at various colleges, all in the same direction. And they provide really a crap ton of employment for the sons and daughters of the upper class to make a nice living while not having to work too hard or deal with the hoi polloi too directly. And, again, do I blame people for taking those jobs? Of course not. Some of them are really nice jobs. But is it so good for society that they deserve to be subsidized by the government compared with other jobs that are out there? I don't think so. I mean, you've got maybe some, like charities, maybe museums. I don't know about those. But generally speaking, it's, a lot of these foundations, you can hardly tell what they do, even if you read their annual report. And actually, I guess the real consciousness raiser for me about this goes even before that Boston Globe story. Back in the 90s, I was writing a book with Peter Morgan on ethics called The Appearance of Impropriety. And there was a really interesting deep dive in the New Republic on basically how major philanthropies had eliminated metrics from their stuff. They used to have pretty tight metrics. We're going to make this grant, and here are the things we're going to look for and the outcomes. We're going to measure against it, decide if we succeeded or failed. And they basically got rid of those so that they could pronounce every project a success. And there was a lot of, mutual admiration society work going on between the various interlocking boards of these outfits and such. And to me, that just felt right. I'd had enough exposure to that world in the 90s that it seemed about right in a lot of cases. And I don't think it's gotten better since then. I'd love to see. I'm not sure. I want to say, I don't know if this is right, but my brain wants me to say it was Michael Lewis who wrote that piece, which might be because he was writing for the New Republic back then, but I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But I would like to see whoever wrote it do a follow-up and, 25 years later or whatever, is it better or worse? I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'd like to see a deep dive.
As a thought experiment, if even only for fun, if we got rid of tax exemption, which is, that might be a simplistic way for me to summarize, your proposal or your suggestion. Wouldn't we still have a ruling class monoculture or no?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
This is not a magic bullet at all. There's a whole, it would be very difficult at this point to make a policy change to get rid of the ruling class monoculture. One of the unfortunate things about ruling classes is the chief function of a ruling class is to make sure it stays the ruling class. And no matter how lazy and inefficient they get at everything else, they tend to be on top of that to the best of their abilities. And it takes a really, really bad one, like Russia shortly before the revolution, to have a ruling class that actively undermines its own position within the society. Some ruling classes actively undermine the societies they rule. I would say ours do that, but that's different. So and there's certainly no magic bullet that's going to make it go away. I mean, de-emphasizing higher education in the employment process which is happening, is I think likely to help. I would also like to see, and your readers won't like this either, a return to the century ago and more rules about corporate giving, basically saying that the directors of a corporation should not be allowed to take the shareholder money and give it to causes that they think are worthwhile. And that's, of course, been diluted through the business judgment rule. And when I took corporations in law school, we actually spent a few classes on the gradual demise of all those rules so that corporations could basically give money to whoever they wanted. And at the time, I thought that sounded like a good thing. They were giving money to good things. That must be good, right? But now I look at businesses and I'm like, they should be focusing more on, actually making money for their shareholders and stuff. And so I think that's another area where you could make a big difference. I think that, whether you're Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer or the Ford Motor Company or whoever, you shouldn't be funding a lot of social causes out of shareholder money. And that's something that could also be regulated. You could make it easy to deal with that through shareholder suits, and they would stop pretty fast, I suspect. And it might even be in their interest because, the problem is when people hit you up for money and you have to say no to them, it's a lot easier to say, we're just not allowed to do that. So, that you would take a number of changes like that would help. And I will say the single best thing in diluting our ruling class monoculture is the self-induced destruction of the prestige of top universities. I mean, Harvard has just smoked its own reputation in the past year. It's been almost as bad at Yale and Stanford, and it's been as bad at Penn, even MIT, which used to sort of stand above all the usual university stuff, has had a bad year. And that loss of prestige, I think, is an underestimated impact. I think that these institutions, they are built on money. Harvard has a huge endowment, but their social influence really comes mostly from prestige. And as that evaporates, they're just much weaker.
Mm-hmm. And might the same happen in the philanthropic context? Prestige, usually, endowments, is what's happened in higher ed coming for other well-endowed?
It may. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. If somebody just wants to do some investigative journalism and look at what's going on in a number of big philanthropic organizations, I'm sure they could find it. Just like, Bill Ackman's just paid some flunkies to go through Harvard professors' publications and run them through a plagiarism checker. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. And I'm sure, in various other ways, there's some of that. Anytime you get lots of money sloshing around without a lot of controls, there's going to be a lot of shady stuff going on. And the thing is, right now, there's nobody whose job it is to look at that, really. I mean, it's usually state attorneys general or something like that who just don't have a lot of time or a lot of inclination. But if investigative journalists went into it, the regulators would probably have to follow.
Yeah. Well, why don't we end our conversation there after I thank you, Professor Glenn Harlan Reynolds, for joining us today.
Thank you.